lead partnerships at Global School Leaders, and we are so excited to welcome you to our first ever School Leadership Matters Summit. But before we start, I want to give a few guidelines to ensure this session runs smoothly. The first one, and very, very important, is the interpretation one. So you can hear all the conversation in the language that you choose. So you can select the interpretation option at the bottom of your screen and choose the preferred language. You can choose Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French. Please do that. Then I want to share that this session will last 60 minutes, and that includes questions and answers at the end of the session. But you can start asking the questions during the sessions. And I know the panelists will do the best to start sharing some thoughts during the conversation, but then at the end, Alex will gather some of the questions to share more about that. You can use the chat feature to ask these questions, but you can also use that chat feature to share some thoughts, to say hi, to whatever you want, to engage with other attendings. We are more than happy to see you're engaged. But please remember to keep your comments respectful in the chat to ensure a positive and good environment for us all. Now that I said all the guidelines for this space, I want to say welcome again. Hello, hola, hola, and bonjour. We are thrilled to have educators for over 120 countries joining us today, including school leaders, teachers, education officers, policymakers, researchers, and many more. Today we have an amazing panel. I'm so happy to be introducing this space. We are so grateful to Alex Bird to moderate today's panel and conversation. Starting out as a teacher, Alex now heads the Global Learning Lab at Teach for All. He has traveled the world in search of practices that will shape the future of learning and has shared about his experience for The Guardian, Financial Times, Wired, and BBC Radio 4, and he's also the author of Natural Born Learners. So thank you so much for moderating this panel. He's joined by Khadija Bhaktiar, the CEO of Teach for Pakistan, Magdalena Ortiz, school principal at Colegio Juan Undurraga Aninat, and Santosh, the co-founder of Mantra for Change. All of them will discuss and engage around the concept of collective action, what it looks like in schools, and the role it plays in the system as a whole. Please enjoy, and over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you, Global School Leaders, for having us, and to UNESCO and the GEMS team there for the great new report. Really excited to be here. Yeah, as Maggie says, I'm very fortunate to work at Teach for All, and I get to work with the many hundreds and thousands of leaders across our network who are working to bring about systemic change in 60 different countries around the world. And I get to learn with them and from them about what brings about change. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're talking about it in light of the newly published GEMS report on leadership, which is exciting, I think, for us for many reasons. Just a couple of highlights. One, that it calls out the importance of leaders in education not just being managers, but agents of change. And we firmly believe that and see that across our network. Also, this idea that it calls out shared leadership, that we need people in schools, working locally, nationally, globally, from a range of different positions to be working collectively to bring about change in education. And that's what we've seen in our network. So as I said, we have about 100,000 education leaders working as school leaders, but also policymakers, teachers, leaders in civil society and outside of education, working as agents of change in education in 60 countries worldwide. And we think it's the collective leadership of these leaders and others working together to bring about change that's going to help us achieve a better future, one where all of our students are working to create better communities, better lives for themselves, and a better planet. And so what we're going to explore now is a bit what that collective leadership is and what it looks like. We think it involves diverse people working together. We think it involves working towards a shared purpose and having leadership at all levels. But don't take my word for it. we're going to get into a conversation now with our panelists, each of whom is working in different parts of systems and schools around the world. And I think through their experiences, we're going to learn a little bit about the leadership that we feel it takes to bring about the change in education that we want to see. So I'm going to ask, to get us going, each of our panelists to introduce themselves and then respond also to the big question, the one that we all really care about deeply. You know, in their experience, what have they found that really brings about change in education? You know, we've all been working, everybody on this call, everybody on the network for many years on this question. We've seen lots of things that haven't worked so well, and we're beginning to understand what might. So I'll start first of all with Magdalena, if that's okay. So can you tell us, in your experiences, what have you learned that really brings about change in education? And don't forget to introduce yourself as you get started as well, please.
Muchas gracias, Alex. Yo soy Magdalena Ortiz, estoy acá en Chile, trabajo en Fundación Belén Educa como directora de uno de los 12 colegios, el Colegio Juan Undurraga Aninat. Y respecto de qué es lo que nos permite lograr cambios en educación, creo que un aspecto del que no siempre somos conscientes y que es muy importante para esta idea de liderazgo colectivo que queremos discutir hoy, es que los estudiantes entran a la escuela con todas las inequidades que son propias de la sociedad que hemos construido. Entonces, las injusticias, las desigualdades entran con ellos a la escuela y eso implica para nosotros el desafío.
And this implies in the challenge to create associations with NGOs that want to work with the schools, social assistance to health, and of course with the families, the guardians. The educational work is one that is done collaboratively. It is done in group to be able to reach the learning goals that we have. So if the school has the psychosocial capacity to protect children from vulnerability and economic conditions, another idea that is similar and found within the report is that goals need to be had and need to be shared. And we are able to observe the goals and metrics and the strategic planning of these actions that will help us reach this end game and results. And also in the implementation of these actions, we will assess everything in the near future. I would also like to mention that we need to listen to our colleagues in the idea of attracting and selecting and developing these professionals to be a high performance team. They have to have a strong culture. They have to know that learning is continuous. This applies not just to children, but to the adults within the school. It is a constant process.
Magdalena, thank you so much for setting the scene and talking about the many ways in which school leaders need to think about working in partnership. Now, Khadija, I'd like to come to you and just hear a little bit about what you have learned in your work with Teach for Pakistan about what it really takes to bring about systemic change in education.
Thank you, Alex. Khadija Bhaktiar. I'm based out of Islamabad. I'm the founder and CEO of Teach for Pakistan. And so it's really lovely to be here. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you to the hosts. So I think this is the heart of the question that I think we all ask ourselves every day, all of us who are working in the Teach for All network, and certainly here in Pakistan. And one of the things that I've learned from the years of kind of building this movement out locally is, in Pakistan, particularly, the development discourse used to have quite a tired old binary with which we used to understand and debate how to approach change. So we used to talk a lot about whether change should be top down versus bottom up. And what I'm now seeing as Teach for Pakistan's movement has grown, and we have more alumni, people who've done this 2-year intense work in schools with our most marginalized communities, and then the fellows, the people who are doing the teaching right now. As that kind of movement has grown, and where those people go, who do they build allies out of in various institutions grow, we are starting to see that it isn't just about bottom up versus top down anymore. I think that kind of paradigm we've had to put aside to look at what's happening now and to understand it. And so I'll give you the example of just what is happening in the Islamabad public school system, which is the federal capital of the country, and a really important geographic territory in which our effort for the last 7 years has been to really change education outcomes for our most underserved communities. And so what we're seeing now is we have 200 alumni who are working in various parts of the Islamabad public school system, whether that is working with the education departments and ministries, whether that's working in health, whether that's working on curriculum reform or assessments, or piloting, testing new edtech solutions, trying new models of developing teachers, building out new recruitment policies, etc. And then you've got these 200 people who are working in you've got 120 people who are currently in classrooms across about 80 schools, which are 80 of what were the most struggling schools just a couple of years back in the same geography. And what we're now starting to see is that really great, new, innovative, progressive, child-centered reform is starting to be designed, but then there is also uptake now for that from the schools where we need for that design to go, stick, be taken on, adapted, and made to work, right? Because I think a lot of the times when we think about policy shift, we think about that in isolation of execution, and the rubber meets the road at the school level, right? And so this connection, I think, of these people who share very similar values for the world that they want to see and a very similar vision for the students that we're all serving together, when this connects, the system level connects to what is happening at the school level, and then that school level connects with what is happening in the broader community that surrounds the school, right? That I think is where we're starting to see this kind of magic happen. The other, I think, really interesting kind of knock-on effect of that I'm seeing is there is also a feeding back to the policymakers what is not working about the reform that somebody sat in a room and designed, as well-intentioned and well-meaning as those people may have been, and how do you get it to be better? So the kind of voice and agency that we all want for the actors who are at the front lines of education delivery, which are our teachers, our principals, our students, that I'm now starting to see happen. And so that it's a very specific example, but that's the kind of image that comes up for me when you ask how does system change happen. I think we're starting to see that example emerge now.
I love that. Thanks, Khadija. I see shared vision and values, connections that mean that people are connected across different levels of the system, and then something like a feedback loop. So you find out what is happening on the ground from what your intentions were in government, perhaps. I love those images. And that is a real picture of shared leadership, people working together through a system. So Santosh, coming over to you, can you tell us a little bit about your work in India and what you've come to learn through that work about what really brings about change in education?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. So my name is Santosh Moore. I'm the co-founder of Mantra for Change. This is an entity working towards systemic education reforms in India. We currently work with 6 major states of India, encompassing a total of 400,000 schools, 50 million children. And we are also building a movement called Shikshagraha, where we are trying to build a collective of civil society organization, market players, and government actors to come together to solve this education inequity issue. As we have been working with government system, and again, I would like to also mention this, that my limited experience is only in India, and I have no exposure to other global contexts with respect to systemic reforms. So I'll talk mostly from the lived experience. So I may start with some of the principles of what we have learned with working with system. And one of the key things that we have learned is that if we are working with system, it's important to design for the system, right? And like, to give you an example of this is, if you are thinking of designing an elephant, you have to imagine elephant from the embryo, you can't have 1,000 mice coming together to build an elephant, right? So if you have to design a system change, you'll have to take system as a whole, and you have to design for the system, which is basically what we always say, that sometimes we believe that something that works can work at scale versus working at scale. So we believe that working at scale is the best remedy to really work at scale, and that's what we have been operating at. Second key principle is that any system likes to be in the state of inertia, Newton's law. And if we are willing to change the inertia, we'll have to provide some momentum, some force to it. And that force is the intervention that we are supposed to provide. Now, our intervention, if our intervention becomes the status quo of the system, then the sustainability happens. So that's what we try to do. We try to ensure that we keep doing intervention so that the status quo of the system keep changing within the government system. And the last thing that we have learned as a principle is, more invisible we are, more impactful we are. Most of the times, we feel that by putting our name first, we would be doing good for us, or we would be doing good for the education system, but that does not work in our case. What we have seen is, if you put government name, if you put government at the forefront, there are higher chances of things getting adopted, things getting implemented, even if you plan to exit the system. And this is not dependent, after a while, this is not dependent on it. This is dependent on the system. The system will take the things forward. One very good example of this is the project-based learning program that we are doing in a state, in one of the states in India, which has 30,000 schools for grade 5 to grade 8 children. There we are implementing project-based learning program for 6 million children. And this, for implementation of this entire program, there are more than 2,500 education leaders who have been trained. More than $8 million budget allocated by the government to design this entire program and to get the program implemented. And to ensure that the program is reaching the ground, we have, through the cascade model, the training of the teachers and training of the education officers have happened. Now, this entire cascade thing, plus the use of technology through which the observability and the learnability has improved, I would say has helped us a lot with respect to system adoption of the program itself, which leads me to the last point on this section, which is about three important things when we are trying to look for, when we are thinking about system change. One is policy or the process change. Second is budget for that policy or the process change. And the third thing is leadership to drive that policy or the process change. If all these three are talking to each other, if you have the right policy process, if you have the right budget, and if you have the right leadership to drive the change, then things will move. I'll take a pause there, Alex.
Thanks so much, Santosh. And I think, it's really notable that when we ask about how change comes about in education, really none of you are pointing to particular programs or curriculum or teacher training approaches, but talking more about how people in systems work together with strong processes, good relationships, shared purpose, shared vision, and some of the kind of tools and approaches that might support that. And we'll come back to explore that question shortly. But now I want to kind of get into this question of school leaders themselves. We're at this conference hosted by Global School Leaders. The GEMS report makes a lot of mention of the role of the school leader. And we all know from our work as a school leader or from working with school leaders about how important that role is within education, within our systems. So I wondered if you could just perhaps expand on what you've been sharing so far and think about the role of the school leader. What's your view on the role of the school leader in improving outcomes, developing student agency, and maybe contributing more widely to change? And Khadija, I was wondering if I could come to you first on that one.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. I think so. One of the things that has become really two things that I'll say that become really obvious when it comes to what is the role of the school leader who is able to drive change from my own observations when I've seen change actually come to life at the school level. I think one is that this particular school leader it's not one person actually. I think that's the first lesson that I've learned. Who takes on that kind of responsibility, who fulfills that role of being the person who will galvanize, catalyze, mobilize the leadership of the many other people who they will need in that journey to changing a school, is not always the principal or the head teacher of the school. Sometimes it is a really great teacher. Sometimes it is a really motivated parent on the school parent committee. Sometimes it has been somebody on the support staff, in very small schools, in rural settings, where there's a lot, like many different community actors play a role. And so that, I think, to me has been the most incredible and humbling learning, because I think many of us who work in education in a professional way tend to kind of forget, that it's not just the actors who we may be investing in, or who we believe are key change makers, who are the only ones with the potential to drive change, right? So the second thing that I've realized is that, so what do these people then have in common? So it can be people who hold different kinds of roles. I think the biggest thing to my mind has been that they have been really committed to transforming outcomes for kids. So they have put children and their interests over all else that may be happening. There is every school, and every school community has its own political economy, really, and its own dynamics that have to be contended with. And there are many different agendas that can be layered on top of what a school should be at its core accomplishing, which is good learning and a great holistic learning environment for our students, and to meet every child where they are, right? And so I think one is that they're laser focused on that outcome, and the second is that they make a lot of different kind of compromises along the way, not in their vision, but in how they are willing to operate with the many different kinds of audiences that they know are key in making this work, right? So I've seen school principals who have really made sure that their teachers, who have a lot of energy to go out and meet parents, have that space, have that safety. They've taken the role of going along with those new teachers on these home visits so that they feel safe, right? I know teachers who've done drives during COVID, but also beyond COVID, to raise funds for the resources that are essential for their kids' schools. I've seen parents who have, made sure that all of the other parents in the community are really looking at what is the school delivering in terms of learning, as opposed to focusing on less important things like school infrastructure, which is the first thing that people generally tend to perhaps look at or focus on. And so those, I think, are the two kind of biggest learnings that we see from our context.
Yeah, I love that. And you can see this sort of echo of collective leadership at the system level, in collective leadership around a school, with different actors in those communities around schools taking on different levels of agency together and making things change. Santosh, coming to you now, what have you seen in your work with school leaders about the role of school leaders in change, whether that's at the local level or beyond?
I always tell this within our organization and elsewhere as well. But for me, school leader is a CEO of an institution, right? Like any organization, any company, there is a role of a CEO, and he or she is one of the most important persons in that organization. Similarly, in any school setup, the role of school leader is pertinent. It's one of the most important roles that you can ever have. Now, just imagine, and this is I would say this is something that we keep discussing on multiple forums as well. But just imagine a car with all the four wheels running in different directions, right? The car will not able to move. The car may go down the dust line. A role of school leader is not only to implement things, but I also say that the role of school leader is of an orchestrator as well. There are multiple actors there inside the school system. There is a community, there is a parent association, then teachers are there, and then you have the local influencers as well. Now all these people's energy have to be put together towards improving child's education. And I would say that's where the role of an orchestrator comes in. How the school leader is not only playing the role of an implementer, but also playing the role of orchestrator to bring all these people together to drive the changes inside the school. So that's where we we have classified the role of school leader into 5 different categories. One is developing self, how the school leader is developing himself or herself, problem solving, how the leader is solving the problems. Third is education itself, where the school leader is ensuring that the education of the school is improving, institution building, and the last one is community mobilization. So these are, if we are as a school leader, if the school leader is able to drive these things, I would say that the role of school leader as an implementer, as an orchestrator is fulfilled, and the impact would be on the child learning outcome. But to ensure all these things happening, and this is something that we have seen in our work a lot, many a times while designing things with the system, we unintentionally we try to cripple the system. We try to do work on our own. We try to do a lot of we try to drive things on our own versus distributing the ability to solve. Right. So how do you really build your intervention on agency-based approach, where the school leader is able to see what the school leader can, what the school leader has, what the school leader can, and what the school leader wish. If the virtuous cycle of I can, I can, and I wish is fulfilled, probably the agency of the school leader is restored, and then potentially they won't need us. They won't need an outside intervention. They would be able to drive things on their own inside the school system. So that's where I would like to take a pause on this section.
Thanks, Santosh. And I love the image of the two hats of the school leader. On the one hand, implementation, like making sure the machine of learning runs well, the technical side of things. And on the other side, the orchestrator, the person that's building the movement, building the community, building what we would call kind of the collective leadership of people working at the school level. And I think that idea of leadership is really important. It's in the GEMS report. People have a role in the system, but they're also agents of change in the way that they work together. Magdalena, you are a school leader, of course. How do you see the role of school leaders? What does it mean to be a great school leader? And what's the role of school leaders at the community level and beyond?
Lo primero que quiero decir es que la tarea de ser director de escuela es una tarea muy compleja. Es una tarea compleja por las imágenes que estaban usando mis compañeros, ¿cierto? Hay distintas audiencias, somos interlocutor de distintas audiencias, o hay una gran orquesta que tiene vientos, que tiene cuerdas, que tiene muchas partes que necesitamos que trabajen de manera integrada y que trabajen con esta visión compartida y estos valores compartidos de los que hablaba Khadija. Si eso no es así, la tarea es más compleja aún de lo que ya por contexto hablamos de pobreza, vulnerabilidad, de exclusión, que son los lugares donde...
And it's a very complex matter due to the exclusion that will happen. I have worked in places within a context of poverty, and in these places, it's very complicated to generate these values and advance in the learning that we need. I believe that the main duty that school leaders have is, I'm currently working at a very big school with a huge number of professionals, and I believe that leaders should be able to provide conditions for all of those in the school and the community as a whole to grow and develop and learn and move forward. This year, the campaign of the school where I work has as its slogan that the school will buy my dreams, will bet on my dreams. And this reflects not just on students, but also on teachers. The possibility of former students, alumni, and all of those that work in the school, meaning families, caregivers, everyone that is part of this community, to bring them in and make them buy into their dreams. That is the goal. When we have that as an idea, leadership is shared, because when we hear each and every voice of these relevant actors, it's much more probable that those who are making the decision on whatever level will have access to the experiences and information that is relevant to making those decisions. As in this way, decisions will be informed. And we will be able to contribute with the community in which we are working. And at the same time, we also have a moral obligation to expand this reach in a way that these voices are heard. We sometimes have connection platforms with governmental, local government, or global access that shows how we can impact. And it's important to listen to the community and expand the reach of those voices.
And so I'm going to ask my last question now to you guys. So I want to just encourage, there's a few questions that have been asked already in the Q&A, but if you have questions for any one of our panelists or for all of the panelists together, please put them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to as many as possible after this next question. And I do see there's one question there already about leadership development, which we're going to hopefully answer now a little bit. So, we've talked about this new vision for the leadership that's needed to improve our systems and to improve our schools. But it's not, the simple leadership of, develop one person and tell them to go off and do it. It's collective leadership. It's people working together. So what have we learned about how we grow this leadership, about how do we develop it in a system? How do we develop it in a school? Like, how do we bring more of this leadership to the systems that we're working in? Santosh, I'm going to come to you first on that question.
Thanks, Alex, for asking me first. So I would say, so when we're talking about collective leadership for systems change, I would start with first point that for any change in the system, you'd have to love the system. If you don't love the system as much as you love your girlfriend, boyfriend, you won't be able to change the system. It's a delayed gratification process. You'll have to be at it. And my wife was my girlfriend earlier, and I used to wait for her hours outside the office hours, right? For her to come and we would walk together. So that kind of love you'll have to have with the system to be able to make any change in the system. So and it's a very, very slow process. So delayed gratification is required. Second thing is about the collective leadership. Now, collective leadership, if we are thinking about collective leadership, we must first answer whether we are talking about a collection or we are talking about a collective. For me, collection is basically a lot of things coming together, asynchronously doing something, right? But a collective must have a shared purpose, right? A collective is where you have civil society organization, you have governmental agencies, you have donors all coming together to drive certain change. And this happens, I would say the holy grail of this is trust. First is the trust. If you don't have trust with each other, this is not going to happen. It's a delayed gratification. It requires a lot of patience. You require patience capital. And for that also, a lot of trust is required. Once trust is there, the shared purpose has to be established. Mission has to be built, goals have to be defined, which leads to micro improvement and then celebration. If we are able to follow this cycle again, and this thing again going in cycles again and again, this will lead to systemic improvement. But for collective to come together, I would say there are no shortcuts. We'll have to abide by, we'll have to make sure that we are patient, plus the collective has a lot of trust, all the partners in the collective, including government, and government is part of the collective. And I'll give you an example of this. When we started working with Punjab Education Collective, it's one of the I would say one of the collectives that we have formed in our early days. All the partners who came together, including the government, everybody had a lot of faith, a lot of trust in what we were trying to do, right? Over a period of time, we also were fortunate to get funders who understood that it's a long process. It's a process which will maybe take 3 years, 5 years of time to look at system strengthening. I'm talking about 20,000 schools in the state of Punjab, working with 2 million children. So that was the kind of I would say landscape that we were trying to operate in. And all of us, we were quite patient. We were trying to work with each other. We also ensured that once there is shared purpose, there are goals with every partner. There are goals with every partner. There are goals with every individual, because in absence of that, it will lead to trust deficit. So that's where those things, all those things are very important. And towards the end, I would say celebration. Now, this celebration culture has to flow not only within the partners, but also has to flow to the school level. At school level, how the teachers are celebrating for every micro improvement that they are doing. And when the system change is a slow process, you have to have micro improvements, and you have to celebrate those micro improvements on a regular basis to make sure that there is always energy in what you are doing, and there are people who are willing to come along with you. So this is my 2 cents on the collective leadership question, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Santosh. That was a really interesting take on how to develop, particularly the collective side of things. Magdalena, can you talk a little bit about your perspectives on leadership development? Like, how do we develop this leadership in our schools and systems from your experience?
My experience is very focused on Chile. And it implies that the students, we are almost 1,000 graduates in Chile's education, and we are in positions of leadership, bringing impacts to the educational system and the country in general. And this shared view is already spread across the system in different places, and we are able to work this idea of bringing quality education. They don't teach for all. There is Teach for All in Chile. And it's not just about leaderships in the school. There is a central administration office for Teach for All. Years ago in the main office, we were able to see that this reach in Chile, we have 2 years of experience in the classroom, and our teachers are also have a very relevant experience, which implies in leading a classroom every single day with 40 or more students. And it's an experience that can be used. So we have some teachers who throughout their entire career will be in the classroom, and we need that. But we do have other professionals who probably are interested in leadership positions, in directing the school, in being part as a manager. And this important experience that is being within the classroom is a potential that probably is being lost in many countries because we are not developing teachers with leadership potential. A teacher can be a good school leader. And it's also true that good teachers are not being developed as school leaders because the educational system has not been able to see the potential of these teachers. So Chile is teaching the world about that and our capacity to impact the system and how this experience, relevant experience in the classroom, can bring you so many different things.
I love that point that we can basically purposefully build this leadership capacity. It's very powerful. Thank you, Magdalena. And Khadija, over to you finally.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think so the biggest thing I think that we've learned about this work over the years is there's no shortcuts to this. Santosh was saying some of that. Not only are there no shortcuts to system change, but there's no shortcuts to developing this collective leadership. And I think it's a hard idea, which is why I think it's also an idea that takes a lot to build traction around. But I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because I think this is the most important conversation to have. So I think the thing that we've learned is we have to do what is very straightforward and simple, actually. We have to be able to inspire people who have the most amount of leadership potential already naturally occurring around us. We have to inspire them to come and do this very difficult work and not do it just for a year or 6 months or, as an internship or to get a nice certificate that will enable them to go off to college or get a better job. we have to enable them to, we have to inspire them to be able to do this for the rest of their lives. And that inspiration, I think, comes from not just being able to, get really, high potential leaders into the work of education system change in general, but I think it starts at connecting them to the problem at its very roots, right? Connecting them to the problem where you see the impact of that problem, connecting them to the children themselves who are facing the impact of all of this inequity and injustice that has come from generations before these children were ever even alive, right? And so I think that's what about the kind of broader Teach for All approach, what the work we've done here in Pakistan makes so much sense to me, is the way to connect the people who have the greatest leadership potential to this work in the long run, to give them a real stake in it, right, is to be able to get them to work closely with the students who are facing what's at stake, right? And I think when I've seen these people, and you have incredible alumni of such programs, right here that I'm sharing the screen with. And when I see people like you, the thing that I'm constantly reminded by year on year, when these people have been in the work for 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, the thing that I feel like they all have in common is the reason that they continue to do it is because they remember the children who they taught. They remember the kids who they struggled with day in and day out for a significant portion of their lives, right? So I think that's one. The other thing that I think it's going to take to be able to build this kind of collective leadership is to be able to push back on the broader discourse that tries to oversimplify and reduce the problem to technical solutions. So we hear a lot about the work that has to be done and not enough about how work has to be done within a system. An edtech policy, for instance, not every edtech policy is the same, right? You can get a consultant to come and write one who doesn't have anything to do with your context, but will probably write it up in really good English. We all appreciate that very much here in Pakistan. But how far will that particular policy, just as an example, really understand the reality of what our kids need, what is happening at the school and the community level, right? And so that's just one example. I think we have to push back on these ideas that we are going to be able to make this system change happen without investing in people's leadership capacities, not just their technical capacity to teach better or to govern better or to make better budgets or to write better reports, but really to lead better, right? That I think is two things that come to mind.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, all of you. That's the end of my questions. I'm going to come back actually with one final question before we close, but I want to go to the Q&A, and we don't have very long, so we're going to do it a little bit quick fire. So first, I'm basically asking you each, there's going to be 2 questions. So there's been a few questions which are around this idea of, well, what if I'm a teacher or a school leader working in a system that doesn't really let me operate in this way, that seems to demand a lot of me, but doesn't allow me to kind of pursue these dreams or work with others in the way you're describing? What advice do you have for those teachers or school leaders who are working around the world at the moment that might feel like that? And anybody can go first. What advice would you give to the school leader or teacher who's trying to do things differently in a system that feels like it won't allow them to?
No, I can maybe go. My only advice would be to just do it. Just do it. There is no harm. There is no harm. Just do it. See, the beauty of anything is when rubber hits the road. If you are not trying anything, that means you are not thinking about it. If you are not thinking about it, that means you are not a true leader. I would say many a times when in fact we internally also keep having this discussion about how do you say that there is how do you say someone is a school leader, or how do you say someone is a leader? We say that the only job of a leader is to improve. If I am improving, that means I am a leader. If I'm coming to my office on a daily basis with not one improvement in my mind, it means I am not a leader. So if that person, if a teacher or a leader is trying to improve on a day-to-day basis, and we should not underestimate the power of micro improvements. Now, just imagine, India as a country has 1 million public schools, right? 1 million public schools, 6 million teachers, about 1 million school leaders, 7 million education officers in total, right? Each of them driving just one improvement every month. We are talking about 7 million micro improvements. Now, each of them driving 1 million one improvement every month for the entire year, right? For like sustained over the year. We are talking about some 70 million improvements. So we would be a totally different country altogether. So my thing is never underestimate the power of micro improvement. Just think about it, do it. More you do it, more you would learn, more you would learn, more you would improve.
Well, I would like to state something about this idea that is important to be aware of the process, to be aware. So sometimes we are sowing and sometimes we are reaping. We need some processes, they take longer than what we can do in the short term. Some of other processes, they take longer, 2-4 years, but the micro improvements every day, they can translate in big changes. And we have different contexts, and the important thing is to be aligned, to do the same work, to do it together. Thank you.
I'll add quickly. I think building alliances perhaps, and in the hardest of systems, in the hardest of circumstances, I feel like at least I've been fortunate enough to, from my vantage point, see various people's experiences, and my own felt like there's always some potential for allies, and sometimes it's very unexpected people with whom you can find alliance, with whom you can find enough commonality that you feel like they can be an ally. And I think that's how we build power, right? If and that grows slowly, as Santosh and Magdalena are saying, slowly over time. But I think it's, if we can amass enough power, we can drive change. In the case of teachers, I think the thing that I love the most is when I hear back from teachers who are working in really difficult circumstances, and the thing that gives them the most energy, where they find the most strength to continue to try and make efforts, even with lots of other things going wrong and going against them, is how their students respond to them. So that's one example of a kind of unlikely ally that we don't always think of as an ally, but that can be such a beautiful partnership.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And so just looking at the time, I'm going to combine one of the Q&As with the exit question as well. So one of the questions a couple of people have asked this is to do with, well, okay, so what are the leadership attributes that we need to be developing in our school leaders and teachers and other community members if we're going to cultivate this kind of leadership that we've been talking about on the call today? So I wonder if we can use that also as the kind of exit ticket, final thought, final question as well, which is, if you think about the leadership attributes, which one or two do you feel is the most important to develop in leaders in schools and around schools today? If you could kind of name one, max 2 leadership attributes that we should be developing. And I'm going to ask Magdalena, can you go first on that one?
So I believe that one of the most important learnings that we've had regarding the ideas in terms of leadership, they have to do with, so we leaders, we are not and only in a position of power or in a position of authority. We are mainly in a position of service. And this position of service, or this responsibility that we have at our hands, it has to do with installing the proper capacities, everywhere. So mobilizing, articulating, mobilizing learnings, and we must potentialize our leadership teams, potentialize the students, the communities, in a way that we can reach our goals. So it's not about authority and power, it's about to serve and to develop the capacities and the potentials of our students mainly, but also the community and the surroundings.
Thank you, Magdalena. And Khadija?
An ambitious bar for what we want for our children. Too often we set very low bars when it comes to the children from the poorest backgrounds, from the most difficult backgrounds. We have very low bars for what we want for them as schools, as states, as countries, I think, particularly those with underperforming education systems. So a high bar, an ambitious vision. And then the second thing that I would say is this love, really believing that even in the people who are around you right now that seem like they're barriers to change, that are difficult to work with. I think love is the thing that one needs to be able to break through, really see them as full people with their own histories, their own challenges, their own journeys, and be able to build over time some kind of a shared understanding of how can we work together. Two things.
And
I can say again, the first thing is empathetic leadership. I really believe that lot of leadership, or a lot of judgment call that you have to take while being a leader should be rooted in the reality of the people that you are serving for. So empathy is the key attribute that is required for any leader and every leader in the system, whether it's working at a state level, national level, or whether it's working at a school level or a teacher level. Whatever level you are, you need to be empathetic towards the people you are serving for. Second important thing is bias towards action. I really believe in bias towards action. A lot of times we get entangled into policy, we get entangled into inertia, but I believe that if we are able to break all those things and there is a bias towards action, we do something wrong, we would do many things right as well. So these are the two key things I believe will help us to drive leadership across.
thank you all. And I just want to reference a couple of other questions that have come through in the chat that we won't have time to get to. So there have been a couple of points about, teachers and school leaders not being well paid, and how do we tackle that? Also, how do we maintain motivation in the face of the big challenges that school leaders and teachers face day to day in their classrooms, communities, and countries? And then also, how do we access networks that can sustain us if they don't exist where we are? And I think I just want to, it's not an answer to that question, but an invite to continue the conversation. We're all here as part of global networks, whether it's global school leaders, Teach for All. And I think that we hope that within those global networks, we find some of that inspiration, energy, connection that helps to sustain us in some of this hard work in the long run. And as all of our panelists have said today, it takes a long time, it takes a lot out of you, and you have to be in it for the long run if we're really going to bring about the change that we want to see. So I just encourage people that are asking those questions to continue joining the conversation, to search out the communities that are present here at GSL, to search us out as well at Teach for All, so we can continue those conversations of the kinds of things we talk about day to day, month to month across our global networks. But I just want to end by saying a huge thank you to our three panelists, to Magdalena, Khadija, and Santosh. Your work is deeply inspiring, and it's been very inspiring to hear from the three of you on the panel today. And I think that what's most impressive is that you all embody that leadership, collective leadership, shared leadership, leadership as agents of change within systems that we've been talking about today. And a final little thing just to say that if people want to kind of dig into this topic more from a Teach for All perspective, we worked on a report a year or so ago where we brought together the experiences of about 600 system and school leaders from across our network and across 60 countries, and kind of pooled their collective wisdom to talk about what we call the missing piece in transforming education, which is in our view, collective leadership. So I encourage people to take a look at that if you want to kind of go a bit deeper into some of the themes from today, and also to look out for some things coming from our Teach for All Global Institute, where there'll be lots of opportunities to go deeper into some of these topics. But thank you, panelists, for being here and sharing so beautifully. Thank you, GSL, for having us, and thank you, UNESCO GEMS, for a great report that will get us all thinking. I think I'm handing it back to you, Maggie.
Yes, that was amazing. Thank you. I echo all the thank yous that Alex said. This was so good. I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. And this is just a reminder that this is not over. We have a next session that you can join. You can see the information down there in the chat. And we have 2 more days to come. So please stay tuned, follow us in our social media. And thank you again for this amazing conversation.